Hello and welcome to another episode of Archery Releases ad nauseum. And today I'm going to do an obnoxiously long, autistically thorough analysis of Ultraview's most anticipated, but also least surprising product of 2022, the UV button. Oh wait, no, not that one. Oh, not that one either. Ah, here it is. Sorry, I couldn't resist. They're already doing a lot of comparisons to these things, and I'm going to be doing that a lot too. So the reviews coming out so far on YouTube and websites have been very positive with zero negatives, and while I'm not going to be negative for the sake of it, I'm also not going to make the UV button out to be the be-all and end-all of thumb releases. It has a lot of positives, and if it doesn't experience any catastrophic malfunctions resulting in unscheduled dental work, it's probably going to occupy a spot in my top 5. I'm definitely going to be shooting this and using it, and if it turns out to do well, I may end up having to start to actually learn how to use this, because out of all of my hinges, the UV Hinge 2.0 is the one that I have the most trouble getting used to in terms of being able to rotate my hand enough to get it to go off. There are, under closer inspection, things about this release that other releases do better, and there are also things that I've noticed that need to be improved on. So we'll start talking about those. Anyway, a lot of Ultraview customers are excited for a thumb button from Ultraview, and others are voicing their displeasure over the price. The price is $299 plus tax and shipping for the aluminum version and $349 plus tax and shipping for the stainless steel. The increase in price as compared to the UV Hinge 2.0, which equates to plus 50 for the button, then its Hinge equivalent, is attributed to increased material and labor costs, research and development, and along with the cost of equipment to produce it. I'm assuming the equipment would be for manufacturing the components of the sear and internals, or simply increasing production capacity, because they already were able to manufacture the hook, so they probably just need more machines in order to be able to manufacture the rest of it. There are defenders of the price increase who ask, what did we expect in this climate and economic situation where everything, including labor, is getting more expensive, and others who think it's fine and are just going to go and wait until they start showing up on the used market. Still others argue that the price is worth it since we are getting an exceptional innovative product and excellent customer service to boot. Personally, I'm just sitting here wondering how much more can be charged for a release aid before the maker prices it completely out of the market. Since my business involves getting my hands on every release I can afford, I ordered mine 2 minutes after the product release on Friday, and to my surprise it was shipped on Monday and delivered on Wednesday, being yesterday. So Ultraview maintains its practice of having stock available to ship when they drop a new product and selling directly to the consumer. It's sold out promptly, and now there's a lead time of several weeks before they'll have more. Other companies should really take note of this approach. It seems to be a winning strategy. So whether you're a fan of their products or not, Ultraview has a pretty good marketing team, and they know how to showcase their products and generate hype. They also say they use a lot of out-of-the-box thinking and do things that have never been done before or thought of in a different way. I would say there are a few new things on this release that haven't been done before, or haven't been done well before, and some other things that I hope they don't start making claims that they did first. I wouldn't want to have to call out another company for saying their release is the first to do something when that thing was actually done twice prior. Check out my review on Trueball's Abyss Extension Flex under the timecode Speaking Things into Existence to find out what I'm referencing. So that being said, there are only so many different ways you can assemble a thumb release, so there's bound to be what I'm going to charitably call parallel thinking, and what I'm going to do during this video is compare the UV button with what I think of as its main competitor, and that is the Stan Onyx. There are a few other thumbs that are similar, like the Trueball Blade Pro Flex or the Scott Apex, but neither of those actually have a direct hinge counterpart, so same handle but different mechanism. So for the sake of brevity, I'm going to focus just on the Onyx. So the Stan Onyx line consists of a thumb release, a resistance activated release, and a hinge that all use the same handle. They come in 2 different metals, 3 different colors, 5 different sizes, though they haven't released 2 of them yet. They're supposed to release a small, it's going to be small, medium, large, and extra extra large. But the small and the extra extra large haven't been released yet. And they sport a lot of the same features of the Ultraview button, and a few the button doesn't have, like the trainer pin where you can lock the hook in place and practice, and variable sweep finger extensions that are also happen to be included. The Onyx is expensive in its own right, but it's less expensive than the UV button. So Ultraview essentially knocked Stan off as having the most expensive thumb release on the market, with the stainless button being $349 before tax and shipping and $379 to my door. The aluminum one is $50 cheaper. So I'm going to try to help determine if it's worth it for you to throw down that much money. On a side note, I can't help but think that there are a number of noteworthy design parallels between Stanislavski and Ultraview. Not just the UV button and the Onyx, or really the Perfects, that came first before the Onyx. However, I now have to remind myself that I already mentioned brevity earlier, so I'll talk about those some other time. So when you open your package from Ultraview, you get... I have too much stuff on this desk already. You get the UV button in its box. You also get a hat, which apparently came with just the first several hundred of these. You get the obligatory Ultraview sticker, and you also get yet another injection molded Hinge 2.0 replica. I think I'm up to 6 of these at this point, and they're all different colors, so I'm probably going to make a wind chime out of them or something just for fun. Anywho, inside the box with the release is the UV button, an Allen key, and the manual, so no loose accessories. Keep that in mind. I'm not done with it yet. So some of the unique features of the UV button have to do with how they design the internals. Instead of the internals being just slotted on the pins that hold the case together, there are bushings around the pins that hold most of the internal parts in place. Chris B mentioned that they were bearings, which are not exactly the same thing, or depending on your definition. A bushing is a simple, solid bearing. But anyway, Ultraview made some neat animations to show what's going on in there, and it shows how it assembles itself and whatnot. I haven't actually seen any other company do that, put bushings around the pins. I suspect that's because it adds to the parts list as well as the cost, and the other companies have to weigh out whether they think that's really worth doing. Ultraview calls it the Ultra Glide system, and I'm not sure what material they're using for the bushings. They said it's self-lubricating, so it's probably Delrin or a similar durable plastic. I'm going to be interested to see if wear becomes an issue over time, since the metal is sliding over plastic instead of metal. They say they designed it in this way to isolate as much metal-to-metal contact as they can to reduce noise and vibration and improve the feel of the trigger. They say everything feels a little bit smoother than everything else. That remains to be seen. It does feel smoother. How much of a difference that makes when you're at full draw versus sitting here, playing with it like a fidget spinner is up to interpretation. Now, it is indeed a noble effort to make as quiet a thumb release with a double sear anyway as possible, because there are thumb releases out now that are dead silent, but they're not a double sear, so they don't have as nice of a trigger. But even the loudest thumb release is still quieter than the quietest bow. So the question I have to ask is, why bother? And 2, is it actually quieter? So is it actually quieter versus just them saying it's quieter? And in terms of why would you bother, other than marketing, they are marketing this directly to hunters, even though it's very much a target release. So, but in terms of noise, what I'm going to do is compare it to other thumbs that are close to the UV button in price range, those being the Stan Onyx in brass and aluminum, the Trueball Blade Pro Flex, and the Scott Apex. The tension, all of those releases are maxed out, so they should technically be the loudest they can be. I'll also throw in the loudest of the loud releases I own for comparison, which are the Knock-On, Knock-To-It, and Knock-To-It Mini. So I'm going to pause this real fast and go get them together and try to get a comparison. Alright, so this is me off the cuff attempting to do this test and see if you can hear a difference between these. So here is the Ultraview. I have a microphone right above my head outside of the camera, so this is where that should be picking it up. I mean, it's picking up my voice and I'm a low talker. So here's what the Ultraview UV button sounds like by itself. That was the cocking button and release. It is rather quiet, so do it one more time. Okay. By comparison, here is its little brother. Not really, but yeah, they do have a lot of parallels together. So this is the Perfex. There's the cocking button, and a little bit louder. Do it one more time. Okay. And then the UV button again. Okay. Moving up to the Onyxes. The Onyx for comparison. This is the thumb in aluminum. Well, I couldn't test and click the hinge, so anyway, cocking button and UV button. There's a little bit of a duller thud on the UV button than the Stan releases. The Stan releases just have a crisp, like glass breaking, glass rod snap to them. This one has a little bit more of a dull thud. It's still crisp and very little travel, but more of a thud than an actual snap. So moving up to the Stan Onyx Brass. Okay, UV button. Stan Onyx Brass. A little bit louder on the Onyx. So far the UV button is the dullest or quietest. Lastly, not lastly, but let's go with the Scott Apex. Cocking button's pretty quiet. UV button. Okay, still probably the quietest. Trueball Blade Pro Flex. This is actually the one that I normally recommend for quiet, and it is very quiet. And then the UV button. You can actually press down on the thumb barrel and then cock it, and it'll, if you let them up at the same time, you can make the cocking mechanism silent. Still quiet. And then the lastly, still popular for hunting and been out for a few years, but the Knock-To-It, my loudest release. Well, plural, the other one is just as loud. UV button. Way quieter. Knock-To-It again. And then the Knock-To-It Mini. Actually, it's quieter than its big brother. That's funny. And then UV button. Knock-To-It Mini. These two are the only ones that I can actually hear when I'm shooting the bow, because it's right next to my ear. But otherwise, somebody standing 2 feet next to me can't hear them at all. So out of that bunch, I would say the UV button has to be the quietest of the group. Does that make a big difference? I don't really think so. It's just that it's a good marketing tool to say, good, release with good trigger is quiet as well. But like I said, your bow is a lot louder than even the loudest of the loudest of releases. So the amount of difference that's going to make, I mean, it might make a difference if you're going to wait to cock it before you hook it up to the D-loop in order to draw on an animal. You don't want any extra additional noise, but you should have it hooked up to your D-loop if you're in that position. So moving back to my script here. So getting back into features, the UV button comes in aluminum and stainless steel. This constitutes the first all stainless steel thumb release, not counting the finger extension, which is aluminum, that is made in the United States. I have to add those two qualifiers of all stainless and made in the United States because B3 Archery attempted to make a version of their Omega release with an aluminum body and a stainless steel cap. They do their release bodies in thirds, so 2/3 of it is one material, and then they cap it off on the other side. But that was eventually discontinued. I don't know precisely why they decided to discontinue it, but I have one where the two sides don't fully match up, and there were burrs around the pinholes that weren't properly sanded off. So they weren't quite up to the task of working with stainless on a thumb release, well, yet. Now all their stuff is aluminum and brass. So the second qualifier of made in the United States is because Sanlita out of China has a all stainless thumb release called the X10. X10 of which they use that term for like a bunch of stuff. Like there's an X10 bow and an X10 thumb release. My wife's film was ready. It's actually a decent release, but it also looks like a kit bash of the offerings of at least two companies from America, being the Stand Perfects and the Hotshot Tempest, or Eclipse of all things. None of the things I highlighted about the B3 are present on the X10, so kudos to the Chinese slave who machined the body, because they're very good on a CNC. That being said, it's still made in China, and the trigger isn't the best. It's good enough. It comes with a nice package. It comes with a 3, 4, and a 2-finger extension, a couple of different springs, and a couple different thumb barrels. And it's like half the price of this. So if you want to go cheap, but you don't care about it being made in America and possibly stolen intellectual property, then check out the X10. So I've been hoping one of the American companies would come along and do stainless steel right. And if you're watching, which you might be, Ultraview, I'd love to see you go a step further and do a limited edition in grade 5 titanium. I'd buy that no matter how much it costs. That's assuming, of course, that the current version can justify its price tag. Included with the UV button is a large thumb barrel that is dished down the center with some pretty heavy or relatively sharp, I guess you'd call it knurling, machined into it. It is made of aluminum and Cerakoted, and thank goodness, because I'm glad they're moving away from moving towards machining and away from 3D printing, and I would not have been happy at all if they included a 3D printed thumb barrel with this. So they're kind of moving everything up a notch in quality. They don't have as many colors available as they did before, but I really don't care. So anyway, the thumb barrel assembly does not employ a multi-axis design, meaning you can't twist it this way. So that's one area of ergonomics the Stan Onyx, Blade Pro Flex, and Scott Apex have over it. Your thumb doesn't connect to your palm on the same plane as the rest of your fingers, so being able to set the angle of the thumb barrel to the natural angle your thumb is sitting at is, in my opinion, more intuitive than having to tuck your thumb, from where it is and then line up the barrel that remains perpendicular to the release casing. Ultimately, it's a matter of practice and repetition, but as far as I'm concerned, more options for customization, more gooder. Also, it only comes with one size of thumb barrel, and if you want something different, you have to purchase it separately. Keep that in mind. I'm not done with it yet. So one interesting thing they did in this area here of the release body that houses the travel and tension screws is it's tapered a little. See if you can. I probably should go down and do a little tabletop stuff, or rather it's machined down so the thumb barrel can't actually come into contact. It really can't anyway based on the way that the stem is attached, but it can't come in contact with the release body when it's set very close to the trigger. You can actually rotate this in a little bit, so it could, but so you can actually turn this all the way around 360 degrees and not hit the release body. So that's a nice little touch. So while the thumb barrel stays perpendicular to the release body, it has a large range of vertical adjustment this way, because you can move it up and down like this. You can also rotate the thumb barrel around 360 degrees on its stem. So another unique thing that's on this is, for some reason, they decided to make the thumb barrel post a clamp of sorts that uses a single screw that clamps onto the trigger stem. So you only really have one screw to unlock and essentially lose your zero. So if you wanted to change the angle this way, you'd have to unlock the whole thing and potentially lose it this way too. So that's something to think about. There was a similar issue on the Cobra Harvester, and that was in both axes, so you could twist that one and turn it around, and that made things kind of tough. So if you ever had to make an adjustment, you had to readjust the thing all over again. Something else that's noteworthy with this thumb barrel post is that, based on the weight of it, it is made of aluminum, and that's not necessarily an issue, but if I was to drop this release, I would hope it landed on something other than that, because there's a really thin piece on the front, and I'm kind of worried if that's weak enough to bend or snap if it's dropped. So that's a potential weak point. I don't know if it's going to be a problem, but you never know, and there are so many weird, unforeseen circumstances that come up either while hunting or just walking around. And things that people attribute to pouchware that looks like they put it in a blender. So, anywho. Sizing on the current offerings is medium, and it will eventually come in large, which will probably be roughly 10%-ish larger than the medium. At present, the only configuration the UV button comes in is 3 fingers. I'm going to update my database of printable PDFs on my website this weekend to include it and a few others. So many projects, so little time. The button has the same handle ergonomics, as implied by me hanging on to this release, handle ergonomics and hook position as the Hinge 2.0. The finger beds on both of them actually on the surface look pretty plain. The handle is not tapered, and the finger beds are mostly straight with a slight sweep of the ring finger. The flats take up most of the finger bed, and the edges round off quickly into the sides, so it has a pretty flat center from which to pull. Just like the Hinge 2.0, it's a very comfortable release with which to draw a bow, and it also doesn't really feel blocky even with my size small fingers. According to Ultraview, they measured the hands of 100 plus people to get the measurements for the original and tried to find a balance where the release fits as many people's hands as possible. I'm not sure what metrics they used to do that, but it would be kind of interesting to see if they could release the data on it, just to find out what they measured and how everybody stacked up. The finger beds on the button are smooth with no texturing for grip, though the handle is Cerakoted, so it has a matte finish as opposed to a glossy finish, and it gives you a little bit more purchase than if it was glossy. So another company kind of thought of that too and did something similar. It has the feel of ceramic that hasn't been glazed yet. If you're not sure what that feels like, go find a Hummel or Precious Moments figure in your house, or more likely your grandmother's house, and fondle it. You know, it's got a very distinct feel to it, and that's exactly what this feels like. So, weird reference, I know, but it's the first thing I thought of. Oh boy, I might lose a few friends over this segment. The Cerakoting on the release body is actually very consistent, and there is no chipping, discoloration, or manufacturing imperfections. If you want to hear all about those, check out my thumb release review on B3 Archery, specifically the section in with the Omega. The seams between the handle pieces, because usually most thumb releases are either split right down the middle or there's a cap that represents 1/3. This one is kind of like an interlocking, almost like a puzzle piece that comes together. The seams between the handle pieces, they do match up very well, but they don't match up perfectly. If I brush my finger across the seam between the cases on the index finger bed, there is an ever so small raised edge on one of the sides, and the same thing, but on the opposite side, is on the middle finger. So everything is ever so slightly off by by tens of thousandths even, but I can still feel it. It's not the most egregious that I've seen on a release, and frankly I wouldn't have even noticed it if I wasn't looking at it, or looking for it rather. That being said, this is a $350 piece of equipment, so my expectations of it are very high in terms of build quality. Moving along, the finger extension marries up to the release body without any raised edges, though there is a small burr on the spine of the release body right where the finger extension butts up against it. I don't know if you can see it here, but in that little seam down here is a little bit of a sharp edge. So not a big deal. There's a little burr there. It either got dropped while it was being assembled, or they just didn't deburr it fully. And there's also a small, actually some of the, it's not on this one, maybe the way that oh yeah, there it is. There is a small gap also right here where the finger extension meets the release body to make up the finger bed. I can't feel it at full draw, but it's wide enough to fit my fingernail into it. So I think the finger extension could use an extra thousandth or so of material to close that gap. There are a few other people online who have already noticed that and asked if it was something that was on theirs. It's actually not on. The UV Hinge 2.0 doesn't have a gap like that. So I don't know if it's just specific to this or the way that they constructed it would have been the release body, because they probably have the CAD files for that already, and then they just added this part. So for whatever reason, there's a little gap there. I can see light through it right now, which is kind of problematic and could use a little bit of a tweak. So Colby, if you're listening, I know you pay attention to Ultraview junkies. Yeah, get your guys on that, please. Okay, so speaking of finger extensions, apparently the finger extensions were Cerakoted as well, and it has an ever so slightly rougher finish than the release body, or rather the stainless one that I have. I'm not sure if the aluminum body versions are similarly textured, though the colors of the finger extension and the release body between the stainless and the aluminum are different. I will eventually be getting a large in aluminum when it comes out, so I'll find out eventually. But one thing I noticed when I unscrewed the finger extension is the Cerakoting didn't make it all the way into the screw hole, and there is bare metal exposed on the inside. I don't know if you can see, but you can see that shiny stuff there. That is area of bare aluminum that didn't get Cerakoted. It also didn't make it onto the inside of the trigger stem. So let me loosen that up. Of course, it takes a different screw or Allen wrench. So it didn't make it inside the inside of the trigger stem. Now, does that matter that it does because you can't see it when it's assembled? So let's see if I can get that too. Okay, you see that shiny stuff? That is stuff that didn't get Cerakoted. I know there's a screw that's supposed to clamp on that, and it's supposed to contact the trigger stem, but it should have at least had some Cerakoting on there and not just be bare metal. So anyway, I can hear some people asking if it matters that the exposed areas are in locations where I can't see them when the release is assembled, and to that I say that it matters to me because the finger extension mounting hole, where I'm pointing at this when I mean this, is visible anytime you change it out or take it off, and no other accessory piece from any other manufacturer in my possession isn't fully coated even in places you can't see. If it's in a spot where I'm not supposed to see it, like if I opened the case and found bare stainless, that's a different case entirely. But if you eventually, these are going to be available for sale, so if you buy the parts separately and it shows up like that, you might raise an eyebrow. So the devil is in the details. But I'm going to move along. The exposed stainless pieces on the outside, those being the hook. I don't know if the spring gate is. I think that's aluminum. But the hook, the cocking button, and the trigger stem, they're all stainless steel, and they have no sharp edges. They are chamfered around the edges. The hook is very well polished, so hopefully it isn't hungry for D-loop material. The trigger stem and cocking button, though, are smooth. They have a smooth finish and glossy, but they do have some residual tooling marks on them that if you look closer, if you get a good angle, I'm probably not going to get it with all this light in my face. So they were polished, but they weren't polished to the degree that the hook was. So I don't know why they didn't just go the extra mile with that. It kind of looks a little cheap, even though the rest of the release looks great. You know, it has a really good look to it. It's got like facets and stuff up here and whatnot, but those little details are things that I think are important. I also think that I might be being critical of something that I'm meant to be beta testing, because this is the first batch, so any issues that come up are going to come up with this one, and then they'll correct it later, which doesn't help people who bought the first run, but in the long run it'll be beneficial. One other random thing that I'm going to say about fit and finish is the screws that are holding the case together. They used Torx screws, star drive screws. So they don't really want you to be taking it apart, but you would need a good Torx set, which I happen to have ones from Weha, but I'm not going to take it apart. So anyway. Going back to features, the UV button uses a magnetic hook retention system and a spring gate under the hook to hang off a D-loop. UV calls it the string retainer clip. So right now the only releases on the market that sport a spring gate under the hook are the Perfects, the Onyx, and the UV button. This configuration gives you the advantages of a release with a self-closing jaw and allows the manufacturer to keep tight tolerances on the internal parts for a nice crisp trigger. The UV button opens away from your face when you're at full draw and loads the D-loop in the opposite direction of the Perfects and the Onyx. The Onyx's hook opens into your face and the button opens away from your face. I imagine this was to keep the UV button as similar to the Hinge 2.0 as possible, because that opens away from your face just like every Hinge. Both systems, the button and the Onyx, may require some help from one of your fingers to get the D-loop past the spring gate, depending on how stiff your D-loop material is. But the UV button is easier to hook up with your index finger, just coming around and press it into place. And the Onyx is more appropriate to use your middle finger. So you use your middle finger, bring it up and push it into place. Stan didn't bother setting up the Onyx, if I can find it. They didn't set up the thumb to open the same way as the Hinge, so they ended up opening in opposite directions, but the hook is in the exact same position when you're at full draw, so the D-loop is exactly the same spot. Does it make a difference if the D-loop is in the exact same spot and the hook's open in two different directions? Not really. I shoot them both and they seem to get a similar point of impact as long as I do what I'm supposed to be doing. So talking about finger extensions and the lanyard attachment. The lanyard attachment location on the UV button is on the finger extension, so hopefully it's on the 2 and the 4 as well when they come out. So you can't really use it to assist in drawing the bow like you would if it was down here, and you would be able to use a wrist strap to kind of take up some of that pull. But it's there, so points to Ultraview for actually remembering to put it on there, unlike some companies. Stan actually forgot it, and it was a thing that they were working on to retrofit, which is probably going to be on the finger extension just like the UV button, because they can't send every release back and drill it. So that's the only way they'll figure that out. Speaking of the finger extension, it is aluminum on both models and is backwards compatible with the Hinge 2.0. This means anyone who wants to run a 2 or 4 finger Hinge 2.0 and doesn't want to use the hunting bracket will eventually have the option to do so when they release the extensions for the button. Technically, you already have the ability to make this happen though, but it involves a hunting bracket, a bandsaw, and a belt sander. At present, the finger extensions are fixed in place and are not sweep adjustable, and the only option right now is 3 fingers. Comparatively, the Onyx comes with 3 and 4 finger extensions that are sweep adjustable, so you're able to change it depending on how much you want to get your fingers more involved in either the draw or the shot execution. With the Ultraview releases, what you see is what you get. You can change these out to 2 and 4 eventually, but if this configuration isn't optimal for the way you like to put your fingers, then you have to go somewhere else, and this isn't usable for you. So talking about the trigger, they make a point, Ultraview does, to mention that the tension range can be set very light or very heavy without changing springs. This has actually been consistent across most double sear thumbs in the last 5 years or so. Stan has been like that since I came back to the sport in 2012. Most of Carter's releases use just one spring instead of the ITS system that they used to have. You'd change the spring, you'd pull a little housing out and change the springs around to change trigger tensions. And Trueball only uses one spring, but the range of tension on the max end can be on the side of medium, though a trimmed M1 Garand extractor spring will fix that. It'll give you a nice heavy trigger for the Blade Pro Flex or Blade and the Goat. So if that's ever, sooner or later I'll do another Trueball review and start going backwards on the stuff that's already out, but I have enough new stuff to review as it is. So reference marks for adjusting travel and tension are lasered onto the top of the release just in case you haven't learned righty-tighty and lefty-loosey yet. The cocking button. I posted this and I never actually followed up on it. Does it get harder to press as you increase the tension? That is something I haven't tried yet. So let's find out. So the cocking button is relatively hard. Well, it's a little stiff, but not too bad. I'm not sure if I'm seated on the right sides. This better not be metric. That is really not in there very tightly. It's labeled force and travel. I'm doing a Steven hand right now. I'm fiddling with this while I'm on camera, while there's dead air on camera. I'm going to run that down. That's bottomed. I'm going to go out a half turn. It does get stiffer when you increase the tension, and the trigger is pretty darn heavy, so that's a plus. So yeah, that whole rigmarole I just went through was to demonstrate that the cocking button does get stiffer, still manageable. It's not like the Scott's Exus Core variants where it gets really hard the harder you set the tension. But it does get a little stiffer, and the trigger, you can set that sucker pretty darn hard. So yeah, good to know. So how crisp is the trigger on a $350 release? Ultraview recommends you back out the tension adjustment fully, cock the trigger, and turn the travel adjustment until the release clicks. You then back it out a quarter of a turn. That's their version of a zero travel setting. What does it look like with extra travel, and what does the creep feel like? I didn't really write anything for that, but I'm gonna pause that and make an adjustment. So I went ahead, not like the previous segment, and I backed out the travel screw to see what it feels like to have a trigger with a lot of travel, and it has a bit of a not a almost like a double action revolver type feel, where it's got a pretty heavy pull, but then eventually it breaks without a discernible wall. So it kind of feels a little bit like a heavier version of the Abyss extension flex that I worked with before, where it has like a steady pull until eventually it breaks. This one does have a break when it goes, but it has some creep, and then it kind of lets go. It's also a lot mushier, but it's also quieter too, which is something to keep in mind. So if you like a trigger with a little more travel, then this is an interesting candidate. It might also make it easier to pull through the shot, as I'm becoming more of an advocate of less crisp triggers, and for people with target panic. So is it worth buying? If you use a UV hinge, original or 2.0, and you're looking to pair a thumb release with it, then yes, your anchor point and point of impact will be very close, if not identical, based on your shot execution and consistency of your form. If you can keep the back wall pressure and your movements the same between the hinge and the button, you're likely to get this similar point of impact. You're basically going to have to shoot the button the same as the hinge, and the thumb release will probably make it easier to replicate that under more adverse conditions. There are guys who hunt with hinges, but you better learn to use it when you're twisted in a weird position and or shooting at a downward angle. The learning curve to master a thumb release is a lot shorter than with a hinge, and executing a good shot at a weird angle is definitely easier with a thumb. Hinges, for me anyway, I tend to have to be using them under more controlled conditions. So like downward shots and stuff, I tend to go to a thumb. If you aren't using the UV hinges and don't have a thumb release yet and want to take a buy once, cry once approach to your equipment, and you aren't trying to pair it up with anything else, then UV button could be a good candidate if you're willing to put out the money for it. So on that note, for everybody else, if you're using another thumb release, if you're trying to use different thumb releases, or if you're using different hinges with different sized heads and hook positions, it's going to be tough to pair this because the hook is in a fairly unique position. It's more over your middle finger than on top of, than on the middle, in between your index and middle finger. It's not that much unlike the Scott Apex now that I look at it. It still has a longer head though, so something to think about. Alright, so I was trying to write something witty and sarcastic to illustrate this point, but it just kind of came off as too wordy, so I'm just going to say it plainly. It's also one reason why some people are upset over the price. If you want to use the UV button or the Hinge 2.0 in any configuration, finger extensions or thumb barrel, other than 3 fingers, you have to buy the release and then purchase separately any additional accessories that don't come with it. The price for the metal finger extensions for the original Hinge are $20 a piece. The 2.0 type extensions will probably be more than that. Maybe not, but I don't know yet. And the extra thumb barrels are $20 a piece. So your $300 or $350 release is actually at least $320 to $370 plus tax and shipping if you want to shoot it as a 2 or a 4 finger, and then it goes up every time you want to try something different. On the one hand, it makes sense not to include things that someone isn't going to use, but there are other companies that include everything you need to use it in any form it can be configured, not including custom or aftermarket parts. As a matter of fact, I think Ultraview is the only one where you need to buy the parts separately to at least make the release a 4-finger. During the course of the bickering about price on Ultraview junkies, someone asked the group what they thought the price should actually be. I suggested the button, sold as it is now, with everything as it is now, should be priced similarly to its next closest competitor, so $30 to $50 less, depending on which material you get. Or they could sell it in a package with finger extensions and thumb barrels at its current price. The companies that Ultraview is currently competing with directly are doing that, just that, at a lower price, and they are dealing with the same supply chain issues as Ultraview is. So let's talk about the competition. So the thumb releases that so much as touch the UV button in price are the Stan Onyx, the Trueball Blade Pro Flex, and the Trueball Goat. They basically do all the same things, but the Blade Pro Flex and the Onyx had variable sweep finger extensions, whereas the UV button is fixed. The Onyx comes with 2 thumb barrels, 2 thumb barrel posts, and 3 and 4 finger extensions. The Blade Pro Flex comes with 3 and 4 finger extensions that are individually articulated, so you can adjust the angles on both of them, and an adjustable multi-axis thumb barrel assembly. So all the stuff you have to buy piecemeal with the UV button actually comes with the other ones. So, you know, you're kind of getting, you should be getting more of a package deal with this for that price, as opposed to having to buy everything separately that you're going to end up using. And that's kind of a point of contention that I agree with the group, or the people in the group that aren't very crazy about the pricing. So I think that covers everything. I kind of petered out at the end, but if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. If you have any comments based on the fit and finish issues, the pricing, any arguments with that, if there's enough of them, then I'll probably make another video responding to them, if I haven't already explained it in the video, or if there's some angle that I'm not taking that you want to enlighten me on. I'm always looking for more information. But if you like what I'm doing, please like, share, and subscribe. Please check out my Etsy store. The link will be in the description, and I will have time codes with all of the segments in here in case you don't want to have to listen to me babbling for any longer than I have to. I did a lot of stuff on the cuff during this one, so I'm trying to get a little more comfortable in front of the camera. So thank you for watching. Until next time, stay safe. Take care, stay safe, and happy hunting. I just wanted to get back on again and do a little bit of a follow-up. This is a day later, and for the record, I do own more than one of these shirts. If anybody wants to make that comment. I realized that I didn't actually answer the question of how crisp is the trigger in one of the sections. I did a segment on it and never actually commented on the crispness. The trigger is very crisp. It's almost Stan-like in its lack of travel in order to set it off, even at a high tension setting. So that's definitely a plus. Like the tolerances for the internals are very, very tight. So you are getting, is it a $350 trigger? I would almost go as far to say yes, it's definitely up there with the crispest of the triggers for the releases that I own. The other thing that I noticed with this is when the release isn't cocked, there's a little bit of side-to-side play with the trigger stem. It kind of wiggles a little bit. Now, that goes away when you cock it. It becomes solid, but it's a little bit weird that that trigger stem can shift like that a little bit. The other thing I wanted to bring up is a follow-up to the issue with the gap in the finger extension and the release body. Somebody on Ultraview Junkies emailed Ultraview about it to see if that's normal, and they said that no, it is not normal. It is not supposed to look like that. And as it turns out, they are willing to send you a return label and a replacement finger extension that has that area tightened up better. So if you contact Ultraview, they will send you a replacement finger extension as well as a return label for this one. So they would very much appreciate it if you actually send this one back. You're technically not really obligated to do so, but you know, it's only fair that if they're going to fix the issue, then they really, it's only fair that we send back the parts. So no extras or no spares. So now I think I'm finished. I don't think there's any other things that I can think of that I still need to cover. And I think this review has gone on long enough. So take care, stay safe, and happy hunting. Oh boy, I might lose a friends over... Lose a friends? I don't have any friends. So none to lose.